Good morning and welcome back to another episode of the Eastern Mediterranean Times podcast. I'm your host, Martin Mount.
And I'm your host, Joshua Litke.
All right, getting right into it. A truce holds. Deal to pause the conflict in Gaza has had hopes of being extended this week. The conflict has been ceased for a few days now, and a lot of the hostages, well, at least some of them, have been negotiated in a release deal between Israel, the Hamas, the Qatar government, and the United States.
Yes. Yeah, we're looking at this deal as of now being fairly successfully implemented. The deal was looking primarily at stopping all conflict in the region between Israel and Hamas and getting more humanitarian aid into Gaza for a lot of the Palestinians who are in desperate need of it. And that includes food, medicine, and critically fuel. And then also, what the media's really been covering is the hostage and prisoner releases, where the hostages that Hamas took on October 7th back into Gaza, women and children primarily, as well as foreign workers, are being released by Hamas. And the Israeli government has also been releasing women and minor prisoners, 78 in total, from their prisons.
Yeah, and the numbers on the former side are 40 Israelis have been released and 17 contracted workers from Southeast Asia have been released as well. So, and as that conflict continues to evolve this week, you should be on the lookout for a renewal of the current deal or a renewal to the fighting that had taken place before this.
Yeah, President Biden and the United States government, they seem very hopeful with that, and they're definitely pushing for an extension of this deal and looking to make sure that this is a longer lasting peace and that this is kind of one of the stepping stones to creating an effective peace process to end this conflict, especially considering the U.S. is really hoping that all of the hostages are released and that more humanitarian aid is able to get into Gaza.
Absolutely. All right, turning to Italy, thousands have turned out in protest against violence toward women in Italy after the alleged killing of a 22-year-old student by her ex. The tens of thousands of people have taken to the streets in Rome this weekend on International Day for the elimination of violence against women. And they're coming out in support of a 22-year-old girl who was killed by her ex, who is of German descent, in the university in Italy. And this is really a critical turning point for just interest articulation throughout Italy and the political system in Italy.
Yeah, we're seeing both of the leaders of the government and the opposition, Giorgia Meloni and Elly Schlein, both looking to promote protection against domestic violence and trying to fight that. So it's kind of a rare moment where the government and the opposition parties are working together on this issue. However, there's still critical differences where Giorgia Meloni has promoted a more traditional culture, whereas the Democratic Party, which is the main opposition party in Italy, is promoting a agenda that's much more aligned with the current women's rights movement and women's protection movement, and also LGBTQ plus communities as well.
Absolutely. And the data from the Italian Interior Minister described that 106 women have been killed in Italy this year, 55 of which have been killed by their partner or former partner. And the former partner of the 22-year-old victim is being extradited to Germany. So the outcry will definitely have some kind of geopolitical repercussions.
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if the European Union looks more into combating domestic violence as a result of this,
Absolutely.
Especially with Germany and Italy being such power players.
Yeah,
in the
especially
bloc.
Germany
Yeah.
being the leader in the bloc.
Yeah.
All right, now another story coming out of Greece. The marbles that have been a formidable part of the Parthenon, which were taken by Britain in the 19th century as part of a deal with the Ottoman Empire, remain in England, but the PM of Greece saying that keeping them in England is like cutting the Mona Lisa in half, to quote him, and that they should get the marbles back in Greece. This is something that's been a repetitive call of Mitsotakis, his government, previous governments. It always seems to come up right as there's a controversial split in the governments and people are unsure of what party they want to go with. And the lead party uses it as a nationalist effort to try to marshal their people behind a possible return of these marbles. However, England not having any of that.
Yeah, it's the real culture wars, if you want to put it that way. But the British are definitely not necessarily in favor of this. The current conservative Tory government, with Rishi Sunak, maybe potentially open to a loan program to loan some of them back to Greece temporarily, but definitely keep them as property of the British Museum. And it's interesting to be watching this, and especially how Keir Starmer and the Labour Party have been talking about this as well in Britain, as there's an upcoming election, most likely, in 2024, probably springtime, where we're definitely going to see the current political system potentially flip in the UK, with Labour riding high in the polls and Rishi Sunak and the Tory government definitely not looking too well in the polling data right now and being very unpopular. So it'll be interesting to see if they try to spin this into to try to take some pressure off of the economic and environmental concerns that have been dominating the British election. Mm-hmm. If they try to spin this into a culture war type election.
Yeah, well, we'll see, because they're meeting. Rishi Sunak is meeting with Mitsotakis on Tuesday, and this is obviously not a super important docket item for them, but it will no doubt come up because they brought it up this weekend, and that'll draw attention away from, again, the environmental challenges that both countries have been facing, the geopolitical tensions that are rising in the region, especially considering Cyprus and the UK's role in Cyprus.
Indeed.
And it'll also probably distract from the conversation surrounding migration, which is yes, a very, very important conversation. Both Greece and the UK have faced migration concerns in the past years, especially this year, and both governments maybe not wanting to discuss too much how they've been dealing with it.
Yeah, for sure.
All right, moving on. Diplomats gather for COP28 as climate change impacts the globe. We were just talking about climate change in our last story. COP28, the second COP conference this year, COP27 earlier being held in Egypt, this one being held in Dubai. There's climate concerns that are being addressed here, but is this an echo chamber, or are they actually having some kind of foundation?
Yeah, so that's something to kind of be on the watch for. One can say there's not really high hopes, considering even just looking at the location is Dubai. The leaders of this COP28 are definitely more aligned with maybe the oil industry and fossil fuel industry, and less with traditional environmental activists. However, it's still going to be, it's still one of the largest diplomatic events that the world has every year. And it's going to be starting on November 30th, and every major diplomatic player and geopolitical player will be there, and all the various countries across the Eastern Mediterranean will be sending their best diplomats to speak on these issues. And it's very prevalent to the Eastern Mediterranean, which has seen a lot of natural disasters happening recently, from extreme weather to flooding, droughts, heat waves, and wildfires, which devastated the region, especially countries such as like Greece and Italy, which do have a lot of diplomatic weight when it comes to these kind of things. So it'll be interesting to see what the diplomats are talking about, what they're going to try to push. The two major themes are climate change adaptation and mitigation, which are very broad, but we've been seeing governments in these regions trying to tackle the economic concerns around the environment, push for renewable energy, ecological protection, and just general adaptation to the climate crisis, which has been hitting the entire area very hard
Yeah,
recently.
and to focus in on the economic impacts of environmental degradation, specifically in the Eastern Med, agriculture is a huge problem because
Yes.
the climate that's currently there is suitable for certain types of agricultural output. A shift in that is going to mess with their rotations, is going to mess with the amount of agricultural output you can have. And you've seen this with olive oil, specifically in Greece, where olives are having a terrible season
Mhm.
and olive oil has become really expensive. That's a key, like, cornerstone food item in a lot of foods throughout the Eastern Med, but specifically in Greece. And it's so valuable that now it's getting stolen. We covered that a couple weeks ago, right? And the more that these climate problems persist, the more you're going to see demand increase for these items and the supplies dwindle. And you're just going to see a lot of dead weight loss, and something is going to have to fill that void, whether that be crime, whether that be government subsidization. That's going to cost governments more money, no matter what the solution is. And the more money it costs governments, the more they have to leverage themselves. And especially in times of high inflation, high interest rates, it's going to make countries are going to be paying a lot more to leverage themselves than they even were a couple of years ago. So these problems are exponential when it comes to how much it's going to cost people and how much it's going to really affect everyone's everyday life on the ground. So especially sending diplomats to the COP28, it's an important duty for any of these countries and any of these governments, and it provides a source of legitimacy to their voter base for trying to kind of rein in their vote and say, look, we had a bad year this year. We'll do better in the future. Look at us. We're at COP28. We're taking these things into account. And I think that that's a very, as long as they stick with that and they actually go ahead and take the stuff that we talk about in the COP28 and implement it, then it's an effective means of trying to get some of this done.
Yeah, I totally agree, and I think that's the critical point. Is there's a lot of talk that happens at these COP meetings and these climate change conferences where all these diplomats gather, and they do have good goals that they try to come up with. It's actually implementing though and taking action rather than just talking about them that's really critical, and that's something that we've seen lacking recently. So hopefully this meeting will reverse that. Uh, Try to stay optimistic, I guess,
Yeah.
in regards to it. But I wouldn't necessarily have too high of a hopes for COP28. Maybe COP29 will yield some better results.
Yeah, and one of the problems with it is that all is the same problem that surrounds many different topics when talking about the environment. The upfront costs are very dramatic.
Yes.
So for a lot of people, like if you want to build a seawall, that's gonna cost you a lot. If you want to build solar panels or put up like offshore wind turbines and rewire your grid, that's gonna cost a lot of money. But and a subsidization here and there might not cost as much. So that might be a more apt look for some governments in the short run.
Mm-hmm.
But the the real cost is the cost savings that that type of thing has over the course of the long run. I mean, we see this even in microeconomic, like household decision making
Yeah.
in the United States. We see it in Europe as well, and like people trying to decide, well, is this a good cost for me? And when it's marketed to people, a lot of times it's marketed like, look, this is the cost savings. When you go to buy a refrigerator, it says like, the cost, but then it tells you how much energy savings you're going to get that year right next to it, because they want to try to sell you on that. Like, look, you could save a couple $100. So that long-term and short-term costs, that's what governments have to grapple with too. And a lot of the times that doesn't get pushed through enough at a COP20 conference or a COP28 conference. That gets lost in the sauce, as to say.
Yeah.
And it doesn't really get presented. So it'll be interesting to see if that does come out, and it'll be even more interesting to see where they put COP29, because as you said, putting it in in Dubai and in Egypt. Maybe not the best places to put it. Maybe we could put it in Athens.
Yeah, there you go.
All right. Well, this has been the Eastern Mediterranean Times weekly security podcast. I'm your host, Martin Mont.
And I'm your host, Josh Volitke.
All right. Have a great week, guys.